The date is August 11th, 2014. The air in Portland, Oregon's Moda Center is thick with red and yellow nostalgia. In the center of the ring stands a Mount Rushmore of wrestling royalty: Ric Flair, Roddy Piper, Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, all to celebrate the 61st birthday of the man himself, Hulk Hogan. It's a feel-good party thrown by WWE, a moment of pure manufactured joy meant to honor an icon, and then, a guitar screech shatters the illusion. The happy music dies, the smiles on the legends' faces vanish, the crowd's cheer twists into a roar of shock. Through the entrance tunnel stalks a nightmare in black shorts, Brock Lesnar. Flanked by Paul Heyman, Lesnar doesn't just walk to the ring, he prowls towards it, a shark circling a tank of aging lions. He steps through the ropes, his eyes burning holes into Hogan. After a classic Heyman promo, Lesnar grabs the microphone. He leans in close to the hero of millions and, with a voice dripping in contempt, utters 3 words that would define an era. This was a scripted segment, a piece of wrestling theater. There's no evidence of a deep, personal rivalry between Lesnar and Hogan. But what if that single scripted line was more real than any actual fight could be? What if those words weren't about a personal grudge, but were instead the perfect summary of decades of backstage politics, clashing philosophies, and personal scandals? What if the real reason so many wrestlers grew to resent Hulk Hogan has nothing to do with one insult, and everything to do with the very foundation of his legacy? That headline is tempting, isn't it? Brock Lesnar finally reveals why WWE wrestlers hate Hulk Hogan. It promises a tell-all, a secret confession, from one of wrestling's most private and intimidating figures. You probably clicked expecting to hear some bombshell revelation from Lesnar himself. Let's be clear, that big interview, that grand expose from Brock Lesnar doesn't exist. It never happened. Lesnar is a man who communicates through carnage, not conversation. He shows up, he conquers, he goes home. So, were you tricked? Not exactly, because while Lesnar has never given a long-form interview on the subject, his actions and that one perfectly delivered line spoke volumes. That grandpa comment wasn't born from a personal feud. It was the physical embodiment of a widespread sentiment in the locker room. It was a symptom of a frustration that had been brewing in wrestling for decades. You don't need a sit-down interview with Brock Lesnar to understand the friction, to get why a generation of wrestlers looks at Hulk Hogan with resentment instead of reverence. You have to dig deeper. The dislike for Hogan isn't about one incident. It's a tangled web of backstage politics, professional jealousy, and personal controversies that have permanently stained the red and yellow dot. So no, Lesnar didn't finally reveal the secret, he just gave it a voice. In this video, we're going to use the grandpa incident as a jumping-off point to explore the real story, the political maneuvering, the clash of 2 very different philosophies, and the scandals that forced the world to reevaluate its greatest hero. This isn't the story of one insult. This is the story of why that insult hit with the force of a nuclear bomb. To really get the weight of Lesnar's words, let's go back to that moment on August 11th, 2014. This episode of Monday Night Raw was built around celebrating Hulk Hogan. We pulled out all the stops. The ring was a shrine to Hulkamania filled with legends who defined an era. Ric Flair, Roddy Piper, and even Hogan's unwoe stablemates, Scott Hall and Kevin Nash, were there, sharing a moment of nostalgic unity. The vibe was infectious. Hogan, ever the showman, was soaking it in. He was in his element, feeding off the crowd, even ripping off his shirt to reveal an NWO shirt underneath, a nod to the heel turn that revolutionized the industry. It was a segment designed to be a living, breathing advertisement for the WWE Network, a celebration of history, of immortality. Then, the spell broke. Brock Lesnar's music wasn't just an interruption, it was a violation. At this point, Lesnar wasn't just a wrestler, he was a force of nature. He was fresh off conquering The Undertaker's WrestleMania streak, an act so shocking it felt like the death of wrestling mythology. He was the beast, an unstoppable monster operating on a different level than the semi-retired legends in the ring. His walk was chilling, no showboating, just a deliberate march. He stepped inside the ring, and these titans of the industry instinctively backed away. Lesnar scanned the ring, his gaze a physical weight, settling on men who were once the most dangerous figures in the sport, but now looked like relics in a museum he was about to bulldoze. Finally, his eyes locked on Hogan. To his credit, Hogan puffed out his chest. He was the immortal Hulk Hogan, after all. But the dynamic was clear. This was the present staring down the past, and the present was not feeling sentimental. Paul Heyman did his thing, antagonizing, mocking, building the tension. But that was just the appetizer. The main course came when Lesnar, with a look of pure disgust, took the mic. He didn't shout. He spoke with a cold, flat finality. "Party's over, Grandpa." In wrestling, Grandpa meant so much more than just old. It meant you were washed up. It meant you were out of touch. It meant your time was done, and you were clinging to a spotlight that no longer belonged to you. And because it was the most legitimate athlete in the company, delivering the line, it blurred the line between script and reality. It felt real. The immediate aftermath saw John Cena rush out to save Hogan, but the damage was done. The image was seared into the minds of fans. Brock Lesnar, the ultimate predator, had looked the biggest icon in wrestling history in the eye, and dismissed him as an irrelevant old man. He didn't just crash a party, he bulldozed a monument. And, in doing so, he gave a voice to a frustration that had been simmering backstage for years. That moment on Raw is often pointed to as proof of a heated feud between Lesnar and Hogan. But the reality is, this wasn't about a personal grudge. It was about two men who represent the polar opposite ends of the wrestling spectrum. They are symbols of two different eras, two different business philosophies, and two different ideas of what it means to be a top star. Their on-screen history actually began over a decade earlier. In August 2002, a rookie Brock Lesnar faced Hulk Hogan on SmackDown. Lesnar didn't just win, he dominated Hogan, leaving him battered and bloody. That match was supposed to be a passing of the torch, establishing Lesnar as the next big thing. So in the 2014 version of Lesnar now, a former UFC heavyweight champion and the conqueror of The Undertaker's streak confronted Hogan again. It wasn't a new rivalry. It was the ultimate monster, reminding everyone that he had already killed this legend once before. The core of the widespread resentment towards Hogan from his peers and successors boils down to one word: politics. For decades, stories have swirled about Hogan's backstage behavior. These aren't just sour grapes. They are accounts from some of the most respected figures in the business. They paint a picture of a man who used his star power not to lift the company, but to make sure his own spot at the top was never threatened. This is a world that Brock Lesnar, the ultimate mercenary, rejects. Lesnar's career is built on a simple, brutal meritocracy. You are either a credible threat or another body to be thrown. He has no time for the creative control clauses or delicate ego-stroking that defined Hogan's era. In Lesnar's world, respect is earned through dominance, not demanded in a contract. So when Lesnar called Hogan grandpa, he wasn't just talking about his age, he was talking about his outdated methods. He was dismissing the entire political system that Hogan allegedly built to protect his spot. It was a declaration that the old ways of doing business, the backroom deals, the refusal to lose, the politicking were dead. The beast had arrived, and he had no respect for the kings of a bygone era. To truly get the gap between Brock Lesnar and Hulk Hogan, you have to look at their business models. They represent two conflicting answers to the question, what is a WWE main eventer? First, the Hulk Hogan model, the icon. Hogan's empire was built on being a real-life superhero. Train, say your prayers, and eat your vitamins was a corporate mission statement. He was designed to be an infallible role model who always overcame the odds, and always won in the end. His power came from the love of the audience, the Hulkamaniacs. But this model had a backstage cost. To maintain the illusion of the unbeatable hero, Hogan had to be protected. This, according to countless reports, translated into a political machine. Hogan allegedly earned a reputation for refusing to put over rising stars, meaning lose to them to elevate their status. Legends like Bret Hart have spoken for years about Hogan refusing to drop the WWE Championship to him in 1993, a move many felt was selfish and bad for business. It was about controlling the narrative to keep the Hulkamania brand supreme, even at the expense of the company's future. The business revolved around him, and his job was to keep it that way. Now, contrast this with the Brock Lesnar model, the mercenary. Lesnar is the antithesis of Hogan. He isn't a superhero, he's a final boss. His motto is eat, sleep, conquer, repeat. He's not here to be a role model, he's here for dominance and money. Lesnar's character is built on legitimacy. He's a former NCAA and UFC heavyweight champion. He brings an aura of terrifying credibility that no one from Hogan's era could claim. His power comes from fear and awe, not love. He's often more effective when he's booed. His relationship with the business is purely transactional. As Paul Heyman often said, Brock Lesnar is a prize fighter. He shows up, delivers a spectacle of violence nobody else can, collects his paycheck, and retreats to his farm. Far from the industry's drama, this mercenary approach means Lesnar operates outside of wrestling's traditional political games. He doesn't need to protect his spot because his spot is unique. He doesn't build alliances because he simply doesn't care. He elevates opponents by the mere fact that they survive an encounter with him. Herein lies the clash. Hogan's model required constant political maintenance. Lesnar's model requires none because his credibility is real. Hogan represented an era where the top star was a king guarding his throne. Lesnar represents a new era where the top star is a special attraction. When Lesnar looked at Hogan and saw a grandpa, he was seeing an obsolete operating system. The animosity towards Hulk Hogan goes far beyond professional jealousy. In recent years, the issues have become much more personal and serious. Hogan's legacy has been tarnished by scandals that have made it impossible for many to see him the same way again. The most damaging, without a doubt, was the 2015 scandal, involving the release of taped conversations where Hogan used racist language. The fallout was catastrophic. WWE, a publicly traded company aiming for an inclusive image, terminated his contract and, for a time, removed all mentions of him from their website. While he was not officially removed from the Hall of Fame, WWE publicly distanced itself from him for 3 years before reinstating him in 2018. the impact on his reputation was devastating, especially in the diverse WWE locker room. Members of the New Day released a thoughtful statement expressing their disappointment and explaining the deep hurt such language causes. This wasn't about backstage politics anymore. It was about basic human decency. While Hogan made numerous public apologies, for many, the stain remains. This scandal reinforced a pre-existing narrative of Hogan as a man with a colossal ego. A prime example is his public dismissal of Mick Foley, one of the most beloved figures in wrestling. As a mere stuntman who prostituted his body, it was seen as the height of arrogance, belittling the sacrifice and artistry of a fellow professional. I add to this the decades of other stories. The alleged incident where a jealous Randy Savage gave Hogan a black eye, or Hogan's role in stopping Jesse Ventura's attempts to unionize wrestlers in the 1980s, an act Ventura saw as a deep betrayal. A pattern emerges of a man seen as primarily concerned with his own fame and fortune. In recent appearances, Hogan has sometimes been met with a chorus of boos, something unthinkable in the prime of Hulkamania. Fans, now armed with decades of backstage stories and aware of his public controversies, no longer blindly accept the cartoon superhero. They see the complicated, flawed man behind the character. Brock Lesnar may not be a moral crusader, but he represents authenticity. He is who he is. Hogan, for many, came to represent a kind of phony man who preached one thing while his reputation told a very different story. So, we return to the central question: why do so many wrestlers seem to hate Hulk Hogan? As we've seen, Brock Lesnar's grandpa comment wasn't a random insult. It was a perfect, scripted line that tapped into a powder keg of resentment that had been building for over 30 years. The animosity is a toxic cocktail of several ingredients. Professional politics. The perception, backed by accounts, from legends like Bret Hart and The Undertaker, that Hogan used his power to keep his spot secure, holding back a generation of talent. Generational divide. The clash between Hogan's icon model, which required political protection, and Lesnar's mercenary model, which is built on legitimate dominance. Backstage reputation. The countless stories from peers who found him to be arrogant and disingenuous, a cardinal sin in a business built on trust. Personal controversy. The racism scandal, in particular, did irreparable damage, moving the conversation beyond wrestling and into the realm of basic human decency. Lesnar's insult on that August night was so powerful because it tapped into all of these ingredients at once. In calling Hogan grandpa, he was calling his politics outdated, his philosophy irrelevant, and his time in the spotlight overheave. Didn't need to write a book. With 2 words, Brock Lesnar, the ultimate realist, looked at the ultimate wrestling fantasy and declared it a fraud. The party was over. But now, I want to turn the question over to you. We've explored the politics, the personalities, and the scandals. Who do you think had a bigger overall impact on the wrestling business, Hulk Hogan, the superhero who built an empire, or Brock Lesnar, the conqueror who changed the definition of a top star? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I want to hear every perspective. Thanks for watching.